throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion. Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go. Man there. Touchdown. Touchdown, Carolina. The pistol. Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson. He tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted. Surratt intercepts it. Holy cow, Carolina's going to win. And off to Javonte Williams again. Pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back. Pressure coming. Aguilar floats it up. Incomplete. No flags. Head on back up the mountain. Carolina wins it in double overtime. Loftus out of the shotgun. Throws to the end zone. Incomplete. Incomplete. The bell belongs to us. Carolina wins it. 47-45 in double overtime.
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heels Up Blog podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta here. Riding solos, trying to get it shared into a couple more groups here for you guys, just to get it out there. We have a big edition of the podcast here tonight because Carolina has landed a 4-star safety and a guy that is a headliner in this 2026 class for the Tar Heels, one that they were really needing in this class here with the guys that they have been landing. Look, the numbers are there, but the talent, maybe not where many expected like it would be with this class, but you're going to start to see it, I think, show up here over the next couple of weeks as Carolina gets ready to enter a stretch where many of their remaining targets in the 2026 class get ready to announce their commitments. And today, Jamarrion Gordon, the 4-star safety, he is the guy that pulls the trigger and ends up committing to Carolina. This one, not going to say unexpected, but certainly did pop up, pretty quickly on the radar earlier this afternoon. Was not one where he had a scheduled commitment, which you would expect out of a 4-star guy, but he chooses Carolina over Ole Miss, Florida State, and Florida, amongst others. There were, some other official visits that he did take. I know before he took his official visit to Carolina back in April, he took his official visit back in May. I'm sorry. There are so many guys that have been on campus, so many safeties that are running through my head, but he was on campus May 30th. Back in April, he did take an official visit to Oklahoma State. He did make the official visit to Ole Miss that he was supposed to make, and then did have one scheduled with Florida State for later on this coming offseason. But Carolina gets him, man. And this one is a big one out of the state of Alabama. I mean, this is the number 422 overall prospect, the number 39 safety prospect in the 2026 class, according to 24/7 Sports composite player rankings. You look back at last season as a junior, he finished with 39 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 1 sack, 3 interceptions, 4 passes defensed, 2 forced fumbles, and a fumble recovery in 15 games, while being named the 4A Defensive Player of the Year by Around the State Sports in the state of Alabama. He also caught 19 passes for 358 yards and 6 touchdowns. The year prior, pretty productive as well for him out of the really a cornerback spot. 30 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 1 sack, an interception, 7 passes defensed, and a fumble recovery in 12 games, while also being named the 4A Defensive Player of the Year in the state by Around the State Sports. He jumped onto the scene really as a freshman, where he had his highest total tackle number with 42, did pull down an interception and 3 passes defensed while playing in 10 games. This is a 3-year producer. We talked about, some of the guys that Carolina has committed to this class, especially their starting quarterback, Travis Burgess, as being a guy that's a 1-year producer. That is not the case at all with Jamarrion Gordon. He's a guy that has been doing it for a while, doing it rather successfully for a while. And so, the hope is that Carolina can, get this guy in here. He's going to be a headliner that can do a lot of different things for you. And maybe he's one of the guys that ends up playing quickly in this 2026 class that Carolina has. He measures in at 6 foot, 185 pounds. He's a defensive back that really can play just about anywhere. He's listed as a safety, but when you watch his film, he doesn't play a lot of safety. He's a guy that plays a lot of cornerback, does play a little bit in the nickel, but really plays that outside corner spot a lot and succeeds at it. I think the overall pass coverage ability is pretty outstanding for a guy across the board, no matter where he plays. I think he just makes plays on the football, and that's something that you're looking for. And you may say, well, he doesn't have that many interceptions. I mean, 3 this year, definitely the peak year for him there. 4 passes defensed. It doesn't seem like there's necessarily nearly that many plays on the football. When you go and watch his film, he's playing the football just about every time that he's out there. He's doing a tremendous job. So I don't know if the stats weren't quite right for him, but he's a guy that really makes a big impact on just about every coverage snap that he is out there. He has very fluid hips, which allow him to seamlessly stay with receivers down the field, and, has some nice explosion that allows him to go up and get the football, or at least knock the football down in some of those 50-50 scenarios. His straight line speed is good, but I think what really stands out about him is the closing speed. And that's probably one of the reasons why they look at him as a guy that can play the safety position, because he closes on the ball very quickly and he's able to make plays. That's what you want to see from your safeties. Now, in terms of his ability as a deep safety to help over the top, I think that's one of the things that you're going to question, because you just don't see a lot of it on film. But I think everything tells you that the instincts are there, that the intangibles are there for him. And that's what we've talked about so much for Carolina, that they're looking for the pieces that are there for guys. It may not necessarily be on tape. The production may not necessarily be there at, whatever specific position in this case, or just in general for certain prospects, but they are going to bring these guys in because they fit all the measurables and they have all the intangibles that you really need. You combine it with his willingness to come downhill and lay the wood on running backs or receivers at or near the line of scrimmage. And I think that's what makes people think that he's a guy that can play safety at the next level. And I think that certainly is there for him. I love everything about what he was on film, and especially the ability to cover. That's the thing that I want to see, are guys that can simply make plays on the football, because there are so many times these last few years where Carolina's guys are being taken advantage. They're getting beat over the top. They're just, simply getting beat to their spots. This is not a guy that's that it seems is going to really have trouble with that, at least from what you see on his high school film. Now, there is still a lot of work for him to do. Carolina has to figure out what position they are going to want him at. I think that's going to be huge, is figuring out where exactly he fits on this defense. But if they can figure that out, then I think that they are going to have a guy that is going to make a difference in this secondary, because everything is really there for him. It's just whether or not Carolina figures out how to use him that I think is going to be the key. I look at him as a guy that, with the, talent and the versatility that he has, I put him as one of the headliners in the class. He's a blue chip guy. He's one of the few 4-stars that Carolina has in this class. I mean, you look right now, the only 4 stars composite-wise that Carolina has is Trayshawn Ruffin, Xavier Griffin-Haynes, and now Jamarrion Gordon. Even with the ratings boost for Travis Burgess following the Elite 11, he is not a guy that's inside of the composite. He's not a 4-star according to the composite rankings. Now, he's inside of that top 500, which is big. We've talked about those blue chippers, although I do think that a guy like Will Conroy could certainly be there. And I do love a couple of guys that are right on the outside of being there as well, in Jimmy Frisco, Alo Suliafau, and Crew Davis. I think both of those guys are certainly highly, are guys that are maybe not as highly sought after as some people would expect. But I mean, still, when you've got him, those guys ranked inside of the top 600, I think that those are guys that you can count on, that you think are going to be pieces for you at some point during their Carolina career. So we'll have to wait and see. But this one is a big one for Carolina. And not only is it big because of the talent that you get in there, it's also big because you end up getting an in with Jackson High School. And that's one of those high schools that has in this class in particular is producing some really good talent. Now, Landon Duckworth, the 4-star quarterback, Carolina, not going to get him. There is no way that Carolina is going to be in on him. I think that's pretty much one of those guys that, Carolina had pipe dreams for. They thought at one time maybe they could get in the running for him. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, but I do think that this does have an effect for 2026 4-star wide receiver Keon Chapman, as well as his brother Keegan Chapman. And I think that it'll be interesting to see that play out. Those two guys, I know Keon Chapman is expected to make his decision on June 27th. That's coming up on Friday. That's going to be really the big headliner on that day for Carolina. I know Tyreek Jimison, the 3-star interior offensive lineman, also going to make his commitment known. But all the eyes will be on Keon Chapman and ultimately what he does. Does this have some sort of influence? Because with Jamarrion Gordon, Gordon was on campus this weekend with Chapman. I'm not sure if Keegan was there with him, but I'm pretty sure that he was. I think it was both Chapman boys and then Gordon that made an unofficial visit to campus to close out these rounds of official visits. And both of those guys, they took their unofficial visits already to Carolina, but they wanted to come back one last time and check it out. I know with Keon Chapman, the reason that he did that was that he had taken an official to Florida State. And then during that next week, after his official visit there, his team went there and faced off in the 7-on-7 camp that they had there. And so he wanted to give, I think, both schools a little bit of an equal shot, an equal opportunity. And so he chose to go to Carolina and take a visit, where Jamarrion Gordon, I think this was the only school that he took that extra unofficial visit to, and probably should have tipped us off at that point that he was going to come to Carolina. So I love the addition for Carolina in their defensive backfield. I think so far it's the best one that they've made in that defensive backfield. And when you look at the guys that are committed in the defensive backfield, first of all, you got to figure out what Julian Burns is. Is he a linebacker? Is he a safety? I think, at his size right now, he's definitely probably a safety. I think that, you love the downhill ability that he would bring, and put that alongside what we feel like you're going to get in coverage from Jamarrion Gordon. And I think you've got a pretty good safety tandem there. So that could be a position where Carolina is done. They have to figure out whether or not they feel like they're done there. They might add one more guy there just to sort of shore that up. But we can talk about that here in just a second. And then you've got Marcellus Ryan, who is committed at the cornerback spot. That is the only other defensive back commit so far in this class. So cornerback, I think, is still going to be a position that Carolina is going to be looking at. That's why Keegan Chapman, is going to be a guy that we could see factor in here sooner rather than later. Not sure if he's going to end up making his commitment on the same day as his brother. That'll be interesting. I'll have to take a look on social media and see whether or not there is actually any intel on that. But you look at, the safety position for Carolina. What does it mean now with both Chapman, both Gordon and the commitment from Julian Burns, both stacking up there? Well, I think now, you wonder some of the guys that I think you have to keep an eye on here. Devarius Surratt, an in-state guy, definitely a guy that Carolina was high on, but I think this is one where you do wonder, with this commitment, is this a guy that Carolina ends up losing to an NC State or a Virginia Tech? Those are the two schools that he's deciding between. Same thing with Lyric Pettis, another in-state guy. Does he view himself as somebody that really needs to be in a system that's going to maybe value him a little bit more? I mean, both of these guys are just outside of the top 500. Both guys, I think, are certainly debatable prospects. I think they're guys that could end up being inside of that top 500. So who knows? Maybe Carolina brings them in and allows them to potentially compete. But I would look towards guys like Jamarrion Owens, a guy who's ranked a little bit lower in the class that Carolina hosted for an official visit back on June 6th. Or a guy like Darian Lewis. I think that could be another guy that Carolina just hosted this past weekend that maybe they end up bringing in to sort of shore up that safety room, make sure they have enough depth in there, because they do have some veteran guys in that room. I think that's a room that does have a nice balance of young guys to the older safeties. So I'll be interested to see what Carolina does there the rest of the way. And then when it comes to the cornerback spot, there aren't a lot of guys that Carolina is really in on. I think one that's really interesting that we've heard some intel on here over the last couple of days is Amari Johnson, a guy that was at one time committed to this class for Carolina, and we thought was going to be one of the headliners for this group. The Jackson Academy guy, don't get him mixed up. Jackson Academy in Jackson, Mississippi, Jackson High School in Jackson, Alabama. So no ties there. But Amari Johnson, going into his commitment on July 1st, there is some belief that he will actually decide to recommit to Carolina. That would be huge for the Tar Heels if they could get him in, really build that cornerback room around him moving forward in this class. I think that's certainly a guy to keep an eye on. And really that situation, I think, will also determine what ends up happening with a guy like Xavier Jackson. Now, the interesting thing about Xavier Jackson is that earlier today, there was a projection from the 24/7 staff that did go in Carolina's favor. So that is certainly interesting. That's one that I think we are definitely going to have to keep an eye on after he took official visits to Minnesota, Pittsburgh, and this past weekend to Temple. So there is a lot going on in this defensive backfield. It's going to be very interesting to monitor this moving forward, and we will have you guys covered with that on the website and, of course, here on the Heel Tough blog side of things in terms of the podcast. Now, earlier today, I got a chance to talk with Andrew Ivins of 24/7 Sports. I wanted to play that one for you guys. Unfortunately, let me see if I have it in here. I might not, so I may have to actually go and grab that from somewhere else. But Andrew Ivins joined me earlier today. Really enjoyed him stopping by with us. And I did not pull it in here. So, of course, I'm going to have to finagle this. So give me a second here. Let me pull that video for you guys so that you guys can check it out. But I talked to him earlier today. One of the top guys, really, when it comes to, 24/7 Sports and how they do things over there. He's the director of scouting now over there. And so he is definitely someone that knows a lot about these guys in the 2026 class. I did ask him earlier today about the 2026 class. And not only did I ask him about that, the specific focus was on Travis Burgess and what he saw out there at the Elite 11 Finals, because Burgess, a guy that ironically earlier today actually ended up getting re-rated by 24/7 Sports. 24/7 Sports now has him as a 4-star prospect. And so we talked to Andrew Ivins about that, as well as the performance from from him at the Elite 11 Finals and what he saw from that. There's plenty to talk to with him about, and he had an interesting quarterback comparison for him as well that he'll let you hear here in just a second. Let me get that pulled up. Alan Lundy here. I'm going to answer your question really quick. I think we can have a top 10 national class. Go Heels. I would say I would pump the brakes on that. I don't know if Carolina has the headliners in this class that are really going to outshine some of the other guys. I think in terms of the number of guys, yes, I believe that the 2026 class will be a big class. I think it's one that could be inside of the top 20, but I think where you're seeing the class sort of sit right now at 18, somewhere in that 15 to 20 range, I think is where you're probably going to see this class finish up. I do think there are going to be more headliners. I don't think that's a question at all. But the thing that you have to remember is when you look at the rest of the country, I mean, you've got some schools that are off to really good starts. I mean, so you look at the top schools already that are ranked there. USC with 30 commits, by the way, which is just insane. I mean, that's a class that's going to be complete before they even get to July 4th. I mean, with the number of guys that are in there, I don't know how many more guys they're going to be able to take on. But the reason that their class is ranked so high is their average rating, according to 24/7 Sports, is a 91.89. You go to Carolina, and look, they have 23 commits, but their average rating is an 87.07. So is it possible that Carolina ends up getting some big names that end up jumping their class up there? I think so. I think you're going to see some of those big names make decisions here. And I do think that one of the big name receivers is going to pop for Carolina. I'd be stunned if we don't see any of those guys because there's just too many of them. They have hosted so many different guys on campus. But I did, mention, Keon Chapman as one of those guys. I think that's certainly someone who is in play for Carolina. I think, another guy who I really look at and believe that Carolina maybe has an opportunity to land, or I did at one time, was Jaden Pettit. I thought he was a guy that Carolina certainly had an opportunity to land. He's still, one of those guys that as a composite is a composite 4-star. I think Carolina's in the running for him. Travis Johnson is definitely someone that Carolina is hopeful about after this weekend. I feel like they look at him as one of those guys. It looks like it's down to Carolina and Michigan. Chase Campbell, that one probably trending a little bit more towards the Texas schools, but Carolina's in the running as well. The one guy that I don't think Carolina is going to end up landing that they hosted for an official visit is Calvin Russell. I'd be really stunned if Carolina lands him, but all those other guys, big time headliners in this class, I think Carolina has a chance to land one of those guys. And then, I think along the offensive line, there is, some hope for Carolina to land a guy like Thomas Wilder. I think he's probably trending in a different direction. I know Virginia Tech did receive a crystal ball prediction for him earlier this week, actually on Monday. So that might be a guy that Carolina felt like they could get. Maybe they don't get him now. But that was another name that I was keeping an eye on. And then, I think the other area where you look for a big name, a highly rated guy to potentially commit to Carolina, I think is that defensive line spot. And mainly, I think the guy that Carolina is really taking a hard look at is Carter Gooden. I think that's the guy that Carolina is hopeful about. They're feeling like he's one of those guys that would fit that defensive end spot that Carolina has really well. If they can end up getting him, then I think maybe you can start to have the conversation about Carolina potentially, landing his commitment. But, the way I look at it right now, I mean, I know Carolina, it's not trending like some of the other teams on 24/7 Sports for him. But I do think that that's certainly a guy that you're hopeful about for Carolina. And then they could land, a couple of the other guys in there. I mean, Darian Albert, I think, is more of a reach, but if they were to land him, that would certainly be someone that could help them threaten for, that top 15, maybe even top 10 status. But I just don't see enough headliners in here. I see one, maybe two at the wide receiver position that are 4-star prospects, maybe one commitment at the defensive end spot that could be a guy that helps them get close to that. And then the only other guy that I have had any sort of conversations with people about, and this actually you'll hear it with Andrew Ivins here coming up, is at the linebacker spot. And that is DK Forkpaw, who comes out of IMG Academy. Now, the thing is Carolina got their first commitment from IMG Academy. Is that an area where they can pull someone from this time? I think he will be very interesting. If they get him, if they get Calvin Thomas, who's a guy out of the state of Texas, I think it's very interesting. I know that he took an official visit to Texas to close out his official visit schedule. I know Michigan is definitely high up there for him, but I will say with Texas, that is a school that is trending for Kosi Okpala, another inside linebacker that I think would probably be a take over a guy like Calvin Thomas. So that'll be interesting to see if that affects him in any way. And then Adam Bolagun Ali, another one that Carolina could potentially land. He's set to announce his commitment on July 6th. Carolina, one of the schools that is in the running for him as well. So, I mean, yeah, that's another position where maybe you end up getting someone that is a headliner, but I still don't know if they quite threaten for top 10. I'm still sticking in that 15 to 20 range in the 2026 class. All right, now I've got that video ready for you guys. I just have to track it down here, and then we'll throw that up there for you guys with Andrew Ivins earlier today. Here it is, guys. All right, guys, we now welcome in from 24/7 Sports. He is the director of scouting for 24/7 Sports, and a guy that knows just about as much as anything when it comes to college football recruiting. Also co-host of the 105 Guys on the CBS Sports Network, along with our guy Cooper Patagna. Okay. All right. I've got a difficult last name to pronounce too. So I know it. Us Italians, it is a little bit difficult, but in terms of recruiting, I mean, look, you're coming off of the Elite 11, one of the best camps that they have around out there. So, how is everything going when it comes to the 2026 recruiting trail? And with this group that we're seeing, just how talented of a group are we talking about?
Well, I mean, we are in what I call commit season, busy season, right? Man, not too long ago, the summer months, it would be like summer camps, and then we gear up for fall camp, and then all the recruiting news would happen in December and January and February. And obviously, everything has changed with the introduction of the early signing period. And so many of these schools are trying to get their recruiting classes in place really by July 4th weekend. I always joke, like, I think these coaches like to go to their beach houses, right? And then they like to see, where they're ranked before they have to return to campus and start gearing up for the season. So busy time of the year. And yeah, Elite 11 Finals out in LA, nation's premier quarterback competition in year 26. And I think there's a lot of, mixed opinions about this event where, hey, these guys are in shirts and shorts. There's no live pass rush. But you look at the roster for the Elite 11 Finals, right? And it's whether it's the guys that are playing on Sundays or the guys on Saturdays, Caleb Williams, CJ Stroud, Bo Nix, Jaden Daniels, like all those guys were at the Elite 11 Finals at one point. And then you flip it over to the collegiate side and it's like, okay, DJ Lagway, Drew Aller, Cade Klubnik, all the guys you see when you go to the grocery store that are on the cover of the magazines, all those guys who are at some point at this type of event. And obviously North Carolina had one there, their quarterback commit, Travis Burgess, last week in LA.
So, yeah, first of all, what did you think about him? I thought the timing could not have been more perfect for this. He ends up becoming a 4-star for you guys earlier today. What's the reasoning behind that jump for Travis?
Well, he's a guy that we loved on tape, right? And when we dug into him, what he did during his junior season, it was like, okay, 1-year starter at Grayson High School, ends up leading them to a state championship in one of the highest classifications, in one of the most difficult classifications. And so you see him on tape. We saw him at his regional workout where he punched his ticket to the Elite 11 Finals. And you kind of had this thought in your mind, all right, is this potentially, a top 247 prospect for us? I mean, I came into the event and I had a top 247 grade on him. Now, we wanted to make sure the on-field context mirrored up with what I kind of had thought on tape. And, he was, I think, one of the biggest surprises of the entire Elite 11 Finals. There was 20 quarterbacks there. Was everyone there? No, right? You had 5-star Jared Curtis, who's committed to Georgia. He elected not to participate. And same with Ryder Lyons, the other 5-star to California, who just announced for BYU. So not everyone was there, but a lot of these guys were there. It was, all right, where does Travis Burgess stack up with the Keyshawn Hendersons of the world, the Faison Brandons of the world, the Dia Bells? And, night one exceeded expectations. Night two, his pro day accuracy challenge scores in the upper half of both of those. And then I thought he pitched one of the better games when it came to the 7-on-7. Each one of those guys gets 20 minutes. They got local high school teams out there. So really, to peel it back in our process, I think a lot of people look at the rankings and they think, hey, the offers dictate this. And that's far from the case, right? Like, this is a 3-year process where, we have our evaluations, and an event like the Elite 11 Finals is great because all these big names are side by side. All of them are competing side by side. So I think he's a box checker. I think he's a guy where the arrow is clearly pointing up. You look at the frame, he's 6'5". The exit velocity on his football, it's there. Kind of wondered, okay, can he make the high level throws to the second and the third level? That was kind of the question mark on tape. Well, at the Elite 11 Finals, he did just that. And then the cherry on top, and the reason why he has moved up the board for us, is that Elite 11 staff. I mean, they raved about this kid and how he's wired, how he is on the chalkboard. And I thought you saw that from our perch up in the press box. The pro day script, they got to make 20 throws, and they give these guys the pro day sheet well in advance. And Travis Burgess was basically telling the coaches what to do. He knew where to be. Same thing with his 7-on-7 game. He's trying to get them to go faster. He's directing teammates that he's never worked with before and telling them what to do. So I think off the field, everything you want in the quarterback position from a leader. And as college football continues to evolve, I think getting the right individual in your building is becoming increasingly important with this, revenue share and player movement at an all-time high. And I have limited questions about how Travis Burgess is wired. Military brat, dad's a captain in the Army, and just the type of individual you want to bet on.
Yeah, I mean, we were definitely excited by what we saw from him in terms of the write-ups and everything like that. You were one of the guys that was really the highest on him. So when it comes to like where he finished in the Elite 11, because what they do is they just put out the Elite 11 quarterbacks, they pick out your MVP. When you looked at him, how did he stack up against some of those top guys like a Dia Bell, like a Keyshawn Henderson?
Yeah, and this Elite 11 Finals, unlike kind of years prior, you knew who the MVP was going to be for the Elite 11 staff. And obviously we name our own alpha dog of the event. You kind of know going into the final day, all right, who's it going to be? And I thought this was as wide open as ever. Keyshawn Henderson, Dia Bell, those guys, I'd put them in a tier of their own, right? They're at the top tier. And for this specific event, and the guys behind him, it was Faison Brandon, who's right there in the state of North Carolina, our number 1 ranked player. And then after that, kind of Travis Burgess. I think he's in that pack as well. Same with Bo Bentley. That was kind of the next trio. And I don't know if any of your listeners, watch cycling. Like, hey, you got the lead pack, you got the first chase, and then kind of the peloton behind them. And what was unique about this year, aside from it just being so deep, like we sat there and we're like, okay, if we had to rank, them 1 to 20, who is quarterback 20? And my team of guys, I asked that, you get 3 different opinions. And I think that's a good thing. That just shows how deep this event is. So I don't know off the top of my head. I think Travis finished like 5th or 6th for us. Maybe it was even 4th, but it was an excellent week. And, what really got me excited about him is, obviously I know the quarterback picture for us, our rankings, how we have them stacked. And the more I watch him, it's like, okay, I would take him over this guy. I would take him over this guy. I would take him over this guy. Now we'll see how the senior season goes, what it looks like in year 2 for him, and how this all shakes out, because there is 12 more games that are going to be played. And some of these guys are going to play 13, 14, 15 games. But again, the term I'll bring up is the arrow is ascending with him. And I think he's a box checker for a variety of different reasons. And here's the other thing, like, he's a dynamic athlete, right? He's got some of the best speed and explosion scores out of anyone in that Elite 11 field. And this is not the setting where you can showcase the type of athlete that you are.
So when you compare him to some of the other guys that Carolina's had, because they've had some guys that have gone through the Elite 11 before and have finished inside that top 11, Drake May, Sam Howell, those guys I think probably might be out of reach. But like, how would you compare him to a guy like Bryce Baker, who the team is actually bringing in this year?
Yeah, and that's a fun question because Bryce Baker was another, I think he's a guy that turned into a darling at the Elite 11 Finals the year prior. And North Carolina took two quarterbacks in 2025, a Torrey Newkirk, a really late riser that finished as a 4-star prospect for us out of Virginia, a guy we really like. And, Bryce Baker, more split opinions, I think, on him. I mean, production on Friday nights, excellent. Physical traits, I think there's some question marks there. So you have those two. And I think those are guys that you can win with in the ACC. Now, the timelines for each one of them are a little bit different. And now you have this Travis Burgess cat. And to me, out of those three, and I've studied them all at length, I think he's got the highest ceiling of the bunch, right? And what is that ceiling? The guy we kind of compared him to behind the scenes, he kind of reminded us of Malik Washington from last year's Elite 11 Finals. And Malik Washington's a guy that finished, I think, right around number 50 overall for us in the rankings, a kid that ended up signing with Maryland. And it sounds like he's going to potentially start as a true freshman there for the Terps and Mike Locksley. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, this is a guy we're red hot on. We like him a lot. I don't know where he's going to slot in the rankings, but I think if you look at some of the guys ahead of him, I think there is more to Travis Burgess than some of those others. And again, when you compare him to the arms that North Carolina took in 2025, I know Bryce Baker went through bowl practices. I know a Torrey Newkirk, late riser. I like all three, but to me, I think Burgess, again, has the highest ceiling and the developmental upside just with his frame and the arm strength and the timing and the anticipation. I get really excited about what he could be on Saturdays.
Yeah, that certainly probably has some of the people that are watching this very excited as well. It does for me. Now, the comparison that you have for him is interesting. I think it's one that Tar Heel fans would have to wrap their head around. Why do you think he compares to CJ Bailey, the current quarterback at NC State?
Oh, well, player comps are certainly fun, right? Everyone's got opinions. I would love for everyone to get on the other side and they put the player comps on there. Very easy to pick them apart. And look, we're not trying to compare these guys that are 16, 17, 18-year-olds to like first round picks. Like, I think it's silly to do before the senior seasons, right? It's so important. We always say, the junior year is critical, and with how accelerated college football recruiting has gotten, so much is forgotten about that senior year, right? Like, the colleges already have their guys in the boat. They know who they're going to sign. The focus is on the season, making a bowl game, making the college football playoff, whatever it is. But, we're talking about teenagers and teenagers that are growing like trees. And not everyone is in the same situation in terms of, take a guy like Travis Burgess, for example, didn't start as a sophomore. His family made the decision to transfer into Grayson because they believed in the coaching. He spends his 10th grade year sitting behind a quarterback that signed with Western Michigan, a senior, just kind of learning the offense. So usually with a lot of these quarterback prospects, you'll see a noticeable jump between year one as a starter and year two as a starter. And bringing this back to the player comp, Cedric Bailey, to me, he's a guy that finished as a 3-star prospect for us. As soon as we saw him kind of break through at NC State, we're kicking ourselves like, hey, man, this guy probably should have been a 4-star. I think frame-wise, they're very similar. They're both 6'5". They're both wiry, and they're both explosive athletes that, yes, have the speed to beat defenses to the perimeter. They can handle the RPO game, but they want to win from the pocket. Like, Cedric Bailey did not run a ton when he was in high school. And I had a ton of exposure to him because he was Jeremiah Smith's high school quarterback. The other thing that, aside from the frame and how they kind of want to play the position, they're both winners. Cedric Bailey won state titles there in Florida at Chaminade Madonna Prep, and Travis Burgess has already got one ring on the fingers there at Grayson High School, coming from powerhouse programs. So I'll say this, that was the comp kind of coming in to the Elite 11 Finals, having exited it. I don't know where the player comp will go, but I think the mechanics are a bit sharper on Travis Burgess, right? I think mechanically he's a little bit more in tune than Cedric Bailey, and that's what turns some schools off throughout the evaluation process. I always said, hey, if you just covered like the release and looked at the ball placement, you would like Cedric Bailey a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly someone that I think is going to have a really good year in the ACC this year. I watched him a lot because we, of course, had Davian Goss in the backfield there. So you got used to seeing him a little bit, and he sort of jumped on my radar as well. So that is an interesting comparison. When you look at the class that Carolina's putting together as a whole, this is a class that I think in terms of the number of guys that they're bringing in, it's definitely something to brag about because Carolina is off to a really good start, but it's a lot of developmental guys. Do you think that this is sort of the mindset of Bill Belichick, just trying to find guys with traits, or do you think that this is basically what Carolina can get right now because it is so early and we don't have the on-field results yet from him being a head coach?
Yeah, in North Carolina, to me, is like one of the more fascinating operations. So they bring in Michael Lombardi, who obviously has a ton of ties to Bill Belichick, and what those guys were able to accomplish with the New England Patriots and finding value and finding guys that maybe other programs have overlooked. You knew that was in their back pocket, but then again, Bill Belichick, you go out and you talk to these recruits, it's like, I mean, he's the greatest of all time. So, how did they kind of balance out the ability to elevate the floor of the roster and then elevate the ceiling of the roster at the same time? Because Bill Belichick's going to get you at the seat at some dinner tables that North Carolina maybe wouldn't have in previous. I know North Carolina it's a very, very big brand, but I think right now with how college football is set up, I mean, Nick Saban's now doing TV, right? Like, how many coaches have the pull that Bill Belichick does? And, obviously this is a college football podcast. Me and you are both in the college football business, but at the end of the day, the NFL drives America, right? They do that every year. The study where top 100 television programs for the year, it's like 75 NFL games, a few presidential addresses, and that's it. Like, the NFL is king. And why I bring that up is so many people know who Bill Belichick is because of all the Super Bowls he's won, and that gives them a little bit more. So I have been wondering and keeping a close eye on how this is going to play out. Are they going to try to go big game hunting, or are they going to try to do what they did in New England and find players that fit the system? I think it's more of the latter right now. And, what jumps out to me is 22 commits, but only 4 of them are from North Carolina. Now, I think the other context we need to have here is a lot of the staff came from the professional side. And again, with how accelerated recruiting is, like, they're kind of behind the 8 ball. It's so much of recruiting, and yes, compensation, name, image, likeness is a deciding factor in every single recruitment. But at the end of the day, you still have to have the relationship to get to, the deciding table, to sit down. And, I think North Carolina's still trying to catch up a little bit. And maybe that's why you don't see as many in-state local prospects. So, the 2027 cycle to me is like the one where, all right, what does it look like in the Tar Heel state? Because we run the numbers every year. I mean, it's a state that produces a ton of NFL talent. And to me, if someone can get in there and establish a footing where they're getting, it doesn't have to be all the best of the best in North Carolina, but they're getting a good chunk of them. I think North Carolina has a chance to be an absolute power broker in the ACC every single year. So that's some like overarching thoughts. I mean, there's individual guys I like in the class, but to be sitting number 21 overall without Bill Belichick having coached one game, I think that's pretty impressive.
So who are some of those guys that really stick out to you? I mean, I know the headliners of the class are really the guys that a lot of people are going to talk about, but is there maybe some underrated guys that we're not really talking about that much that you really like?
Well, I mean, Trayshawn Ruffin, I know he's the highest ranked of the bunch, so he's low hanging fruit. But I've always loved this kid. He is a trench bully, power base kind of interior player. I know he was committed to Texas A&M, flips over to North Carolina. I think that's one that flies under the national radar. But you look up and you're gonna be like, all right, this guy in the middle. I mean, all signs pointed to him hitting on Saturdays and potentially Sundays. I loved what he put on tape as a junior. I mean, we put him in the top 247 when, there wasn't a lot out there on him. And then we saw him on the Under Armour camp circuit, kind of confirmed what we thought about Trayshawn Ruffin. So I think he's the headliner on defense. Travis Burgess is the headliner on offense. Will Conroy, North Carolina goes and flips him from Oklahoma, a kid that's going to spend his senior season at IMG Academy. And, the rule of thumb is like bet on offensive linemen out of IMG Academy. Like every single year, they are sending guys to the NFL. And the Evan Neals, the JC Lathams, the Francis Mawanoa, the Jordan Seaton, like those are the premium bodies that everyone knows about. But Robert Hainsey's came through there. Daniel Falele's came through there. There's been some other individuals that have come out of IMG Academy. I think it's the top high school developers of offensive line talent. They do an excellent job there. Will Conroy, believe he's going to snap the football this year for the Florida-based powerhouse. And, it's not easy to find guys that can be that voice in the middle, right? And if you look at the transfer portal every year, like those are some of the most coveted individuals. Got a chance to spend some time with him back in February at their kind of showcase, and really like the way that kid's wired. He's got a wrestling background, so he's another one where, okay, yeah, you see the vision with him. I'm kind of scrolling through the commit list here. Xavion Griffin-Haynes, 4-star prospect for us. I think a lot of people are going to wonder, okay, why isn't this kid a little bit higher? And to us, just want to see some more, right? He is a lean individual, but these are the type of guys that if they hit, much like with Will Conroy, they come with a very expensive price tag in the transfer portal. So I love the idea of North Carolina taking him and, wanting to develop him and get him right. I think that was certainly a notable addition for them.
Yeah, no, that was definitely one that was big, an in-state guy. My question is, he reminds me a lot of Des Evans. Is this staff one that can develop him a little bit better than the previous staff did with Des Evans?
That's a good player comp.
Yeah, I mean, just from what I've seen, especially the build on him and the production, I think for if I'm remembering correctly, for Des was a little bit more, but when I went and watched him in person, I got the same feeling from him. You're looking for more violence from him, a little more of that edge, because that's what you're hoping that we're going to see from him at the college level. That's something you're hoping we're going to see from Bill Belichick guys. I love all those guys. Will Conroy, we just talked about him last night, and that's definitely a guy. I can't remember the last time Carolina actually went out and got a legitimately highly rated offensive center, a guy that's just somebody that plays in the middle of that offensive line. They've gone with so many transfers, so that's definitely big. The last thing I'll ask you, about, Bill Belichick and specifically this working at this level. How do you think that he is transitioning at this level? From what you've heard from some of the guys, there were concerns about how he would translate onto the recruiting trail. Would he really be that involved? What have you heard from some of these kids when it comes to their opinions of Bill Belichick and how involved he's been in the recruiting process?
Like I said, I think he's got a pull to him, right? And it used to always be Nick Saban, right? And I'm based in Florida, and Alabama used to get what Alabama wanted from the Sunshine State. It used to always be like the coaches, the high school coaches and the high school trainers would be like, well, hey, Alabama offered. It's like that was the offer that has carried the weight. And now obviously Kalen DeBoer's there in Tuscaloosa. So you're kind of wondering like, all right, where's that pivot going to be? Is it going to be to Kirby Smart and Georgia's like that, the offer that, everyone puts on the pedestal? And I still think it's open. To me, Bill Belichick, I don't know what to make of him yet. Like, we talked about the recruiting class being 21 overall, and I like the floor of that group. And really, in my opinion, you can get caught up in the headliners, but where these teams make their money is the guys that are, rated 5 through 20 in the recruiting class. You have to hit on those individuals. And I always say it, like, high school recruiting is the NFL draft, and the transfer portal is free agency. And yeah, certainly teams can make some noise with notable free agency additions. But man, you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, you look at the Kansas City Chiefs. Yeah, some big name free agents out there, but they also got a lot of day 3 picks that are playing huge minutes for them in key roles. And those guys are on rookie contracts, and it unlocks things for you. So I like how North Carolina has built out the back end of this roster. I think a lot of the takes make sense. You see the developmental upside. And then to me, I look at the list of official visitors that have been on campus here this summer, and that's where I get really excited, right? You go up and down the list, DK Forbka, another IMG Academy kid. I think he's got on-ball, off-ball versatility, someone that's going to spin it there. Jaden Petit, wide receiver out of Florida. Brandon Anderson, he's been there. T.I., the defensive lineman out of Colorado. I butcher his name all the time. All I know is we got him in the Navy All-American Bowl. I think he's a unique body type in this type of class. So CJ Sadler out of Michigan, he's a fun player. Reminds me a little bit of Ray McLeod. You can play him at corner. I think he's a slot receiver. I think he's a weapon. So, to me, I look at the guys that have been on campus, and I think there's a runway where, okay, recruits see what year 1 looks like on Bill Belichick, and then they can bust out that spatula leading up to the early signing period. Because I think it's so easy right now to – all these kids are making commitments, and, a lot of these recruiting classes are set. We tend to forget that, hey, come November, a lot of staffs are trying to pry and flip these guys away. And I think what North Carolina has done in terms of getting these guys on campus, having the conversations, they put themselves in a position where if there is on-field success in 2025, then it's going to be much easier to pry some of these guys away if they are committed to other schools.
Yeah, and that could be the strategy that they end up going with. I think that would be a little bit different, certainly for Michael Lombardi and his staff prying guys away, but we've seen it. They've already done it with Trayshawn Ruffin. They did it with Will Conroy, so that could be a strategy that they use going into the season. Hey, Andrew, thanks so much, man. Really appreciate you stopping by. Great stuff on Travis Burgess. We really appreciate all the coverage that you had out there. Make sure you guys head over to Twitter, give him a follow at Andrew_Ivins. That's IVINS. He is the director of scouting for 24/7 Sports, keeper of the high school freak list, and co-host of the 105 Guys podcast. We really appreciate you stopping by with us. Great stuff again. Thanks, man.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
All right, so there you guys go. Hold on, let me throw my my picture back up here for you guys. But you heard from Andrew Ivins there, and look, Carolina gets one of those big names, that we talked about that Carolina hadn't necessarily gotten in Jamarrion Gordon. If you missed that early part of the podcast, make sure you go back and check it out, guys. It was, that was such a big commitment for Carolina, really, to get a headliner in, especially for that secondary. And we will, of course, be breaking down any other big commitments that we have coming up. And there are a ton of them on deck, guys. I mean, no lie. Carolina, they have one tomorrow that is definitely worth keeping an eye on, and Zamorius Robertson out of the state of South Carolina, a 3-star receiver. And then from there, it really just takes off. I mentioned that you do have Keon Chapman, who's going to be making his decision, a 4-star wide receiver. That'll be made on Friday, along with Tyreek Jemison. And that really just sets the stage before there are a bunch of guys on July 1st that are going to be announcing their commitments. And then from then on, we will be, packed to the brim with decisions that we will be keeping an eye on. So keep tabs on all of that stuff on the website at HeelToughBlog.com. We would greatly appreciate that. Right now, go back, read a little bit more about Jamarrion Gordon, if you could. That'd be great for us. It would also help educate you guys a little bit more, even more than I gave you here tonight. You can read in that article that we put up about him earlier today. There are some other guys who have narrowed down when they're going to make their decisions, including 4-star interior offensive lineman Brandon Anderson and 3-star defensive lineman, interior defensive lineman Manoa Fapusa has announced his official decision date as well. We also told you earlier about Kosi Okpala. We'll have an article up about him tomorrow about when his decision date is coming up and if Carolina is still in the running for him. So keep an eye out on the website for all of that stuff coming up here in the next couple of days. Meanwhile, on the basketball side of things, of course, watching the NBA draft to see where Drake Powell is going to go. I don't know if Josh is going to put anything up about that, but we, of course, will be keeping you guys up to date on where he goes on our personal Twitter pages at HTB Anthony and at HTB_Josh. So make sure you're keeping an eye on that and any on the court stuff that Carolina has going on, off the court stuff surrounding the program as well. And then, of course, recruiting stuff surrounding the 2026 and 2027 recruiting classes. Josh has you covered. There's an article that he put up yesterday, I think it might have been the day before. Days are running together with how crazy things have been and how much it's going to start picking up here. So there is an article up there, though, that tells you about some of the offers that Carolina handed out over the last week to the 2026 and 2027 classes. So make sure you go back and check that out as well on the website. Again, HeelToughBlog.com. And the best way to be able to check out all that stuff is through our social media pages at Heel Tough Blog on Twitter. When you go there, make sure you hit the follow button and then turn on all post notifications, because the only notifications that we have, the only tweets that we have are tweets of our content, whether it is the articles, if it's the podcast, whether, that's the live editions or the, editions after we have gone live and have posted them to the site. Make sure you are locked in on all that stuff, and that's the best way to do it. The Facebook page as well is another great place to be able to do all of that stuff. So make sure you go there and check that out. Just search Heel Tough Blog on Facebook. You'll find us there. If you could, give us a like, and it will automatically follow it. That'll notify you when we go live, but it will not notify you when we put up the articles. So that's the difference between that and Twitter. Now, those articles will appear on your timeline. If you'd rather do it that way, then go ahead and do it that way. We would greatly appreciate your support, no matter how we get it, for the website and for the podcast side of things. So that wraps it up for tonight's edition of the podcast. Want to thank Andrew Ivins for stopping by with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.